Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my championship predictions. This is it. These are the games before we make a decision on who gets into the college football playoff. I'm truly excited. And there's a lot of outcomes that I hope for. Obviously, most people would know which one, which I cannot even believe my team is in this conversation right now. I mean, this is truly one of the greatest program turnarounds we've ever seen. USC will get credit. Washington will especially get credit. But this needs some goddamn credit, man. I mean, this is quite outstanding. But without saying too much, like it, subscribe, have a comment, all this else. Let's get straight into this thing. Tulane versus Army. Had to include it. I think Tulane's gonna win this. Army really hasn't played anybody this year. Tulane played competitive against Kansas State. I mean, Kansas State, without that scoop and score, it's probably going into at least overtime. And then I think like an offensive pass interference took away a Tulane touchdown. Tulane kind of beat themselves down. I don't think Tulane is the worst thing ever, but the problem is that is Kansas State, who is like a 4-loss team in the Big 12 right now, not even near the top. So I'm happy that both of these teams remain at the bottom of the top 25, but I think Tulane is going to get another AAC championship victory. Army has had a really good defense this year against the teams they've played, but again, Tulane is the best team, or the second best team, obviously nowhere close to Notre Dame. Tulane is going to be the second best team they play, and unless Army can get the ball absolutely moving, I think this one could end up being defensive, with Army not scoring very many points and not being very competitive throughout the whole game. Just maybe like a late comeback or something. I've got Tulane winning this one. Boise State versus UNLV. So looking back on this matchup that was already played in the season, you will recognize the fact that UNLV actually really competed well in this game, and I mean, it literally took everything for Boise State to win this game, and Boise State still only walking away with a 5-point victory. Boise State had to convert all 4 of their fourth downs. They had to UNLV had an interception, as well as UNLV had 64 yards of penalties compared to Boise State's 35. I mean, literally, yards wise, pretty equal. Like, everything else is pretty equal. It's just Boise State managed to convert all 4 of their fourth downs, which ended up being very important to obviously the whole game, especially since UNLV missed a field goal in this game as well, which just hurts their chances even more of winning this game. I think UNLV lost this one. They let it get away from them. They let it get away from them, and yeah, it was at UNLV. I don't really think too much of road games in Mountain West. I don't think it's that big of a deal in the Mountain West, although it might be a little bit, but nothing too crazy. There's just not too many fans that show up in the Mountain West, except for maybe Boise State. But this game, let's see, where is this game being played? Oh boy, it's being played at Boise. Interesting. Why is it at Boise? Does the better team just get home field? It's at Boise State. I didn't know that. So that's going to make it a lot more difficult for UNLV. But again, I feel like seriously, UNLV let the first one slip away from them. Boise State in their home field, they're going to have the crowd. That's a game that will have a crowd in the Mountain West. However, UNLV has the number 15 rush defense in the league, and while Ashton Jeanty has performed really well, this was arguably his worst performance of the year was against this team. It was arguably his worst performance. At 33 carries, he only had 128 yards and a touchdown. This dude was averaging like 4 yards a carry, which isn't like the worst thing ever, but 33 touches, like that's not really cutting it. I think UNLV is going to they're going to play better rush defense, in my opinion. Or at the very least, I think they're going to continue to hold Ashton Jeanty to what they did last game. But more importantly, they're going to stop the quarterback from running the ball, because that was something that destroyed them, mainly on a 4th down conversion. That was something that destroyed them think on like the final drive of the game, they went for a 4th down. Yeah, and the quarterback ran for 2 yards. Not sure if it was a QB sneak or what it was, but this quarterback has definitely used his legs in the past. He's definitely used his legs, and I think that's something they need to look out for. If they don't shut this quarterback down, and stop him from running the ball, I think they're going to have some serious problems. Also, something else to note that happened in this game. UNLV basically, with barely any time left on the clock before the end of the first half, went 3 and out with an interception, which gave Boise State the ball right in front of the goal line. They went 4 plays, 7 yards for a touchdown. It took them all 4 to go 7 yards. That's another 7 points for Boise State, and obviously the missed field goal. There's a lot of things that could go differently in this game, but I think UNLV is going in here with a different mentality now. Now that they let the first one get away from them, they learned, and I think playing the same team twice is a curse. I think it spells doom a lot, so give me UNLV by 10. I'm really hoping that this is the outcome, especially since Boise State has started to dwindle a little bit, in my opinion. They've started to dwindle since that game. Obviously, they were on the highest of highs, only losing by 3 to Oregon, beating Washington State when they finally got in the top 25, and then beating UNLV. They kind of started to stop. They barely beat Nevada by 7 points, barely beat Wyoming on the road by 4 points, and then it's the San Jose State game. They're winning by 3 scores, but it took them a while to get there. Oregon State game as well was competitive throughout a lot of the game. I don't know. Boise State they're seeming like they're dwindling right now. UNLV has quietly won all their games since their overtime loss against Syracuse and their 5-point loss against Boise State. I think UNLV gets her done in Boise Stadium. I'm still standing by. I think UNLV is a pretty good team. This team controlled their destiny with that road win against Kansas. This team controlled their destiny to make it to the college football playoff, and they lost a thriller in overtime against Syracuse, and then they let one slip away against Boise State. This team is a really good Mountain West team, underrated as balls. I think they'll get it done. Iowa State versus ASU, the big one. And it's just devastating knowing that our star receiver in crunch time got hurt. It literally every single day I have to think about this game, and I think about Jordan Tyson getting hurt, and it's devastating. Now, I will say, Iowa State, to start the year, looked like a much better team offensively. They looked like a much better team offensively, I will say. Their win over Baylor looks really impressive, the way they kind of just dominated. They did have a close one against Iowa, but that put them on the radar, and that's a rivalry game. And then their only other win from that is against Kansas State, which, quite frankly, Kansas State should have won that game. But the first half of the season, Iowa State was looking like that team, and they respectfully got ranked really highly. It was once they played UCF, things started to slope. Considering R.J. Harvey against Iowa State ran all over them. And while that is one of the scariest run games in the league, they also threw 2 pick sixes. Yeah, they also threw 2 pick sixes in that game, if I remember correctly. Yeah, because one was practically a pick six, which one play later gave UCF a touchdown. Yeah. And once the quarterback started performing like that, Iowa State started to look worse and worse. They almost dropped one to UCF in their home field. Then they dropped one to Texas Tech in their home field. Then they dropped one to Kansas big time on the road. Bounced back with the win against struggling, to say the least, Cincinnati team. Cincinnati, since beating an injured ASU team, has lost every single game. They lost out. They were 5-2. They lost out from that point on, which is pretty embarrassing. But they bounced back with a win there, which it again was a competitive game. It took all the way until like the end of the fourth quarter for Iowa State to take off. It was 17-20 with like 5 minutes left in the game. It was a close ball game, and Utah had to miss a field goal for Iowa State to avoid overtime. And a game Utah was just, I mean, Utah's not the better team there, but they could have definitely won that one. And then Kansas State versus Iowa State. I mean, Kansas State did what they could to give this one to Iowa State. 2 fumbles, and they failed 3 of their 4 fourth down conversions, one of which at the Kansas State 25 instantly fumbled the ball, which gave Iowa State an early touchdown. Kansas State made it look like easy work moving on this team and shutting this team down defensively. But again, 2 plays, 6 yards, fumble gives Iowa State a very short field to go score points. Basically, I mean, 14 of their 29 points, 16 of their 29 points were given by mistakes, because that Avery Johnson had a safety where he was just running backwards and couldn't make the throw to the line of scrimmage, went all the way from like the 30 or something all the way back to the end zone and threw an intentional grounding, which gave Iowa State basically the game, because it put Iowa State up to 26, and then they used that drive 14 plays, 60 yards, 7 minutes to go put up 3 points, make it an 8-point game. And then, of course, what does Kansas State do? 4th and 2 at their own 35. They can't convert, and then they miss a field goal. Or Iowa State goes a little plays, miss a field goal. Kansas State gets another opportunity and just gets shut down. Like, seriously, Kansas State doesn't make those 2 fumbles or that hideous mistake, they're winning that football game. ASU, on the other hand, has been severely dominant in the first half of games. Kansas State, they were up 21-0 in that going into halftime. They were up 24-0, and they were getting ready to make it 31-0 before Jordan Tyson fumbled and gave Kansas State an invisible spark. Not a sparky, an invisible spark. BYU, ASU was up 21-0. They let him score a field goal. We were right on the goal line. We could have kicked a field goal, but instead we went for it, didn't get it. Gave a momentum boost to BYU. They tried to bring the game back, but they couldn't because ASU was better. And most recently, a 49-7 annihilation of Arizona. In all these games, you have to note how well Jordan Tyson played in. We'll start with Kansas State. The game that got him on the radar. 12 receptions, 176 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Against BYU, 9 receptions, 125 yards. Against Arizona, 8 receptions, 143 yards, and a touchdown. Like, dude has literally been playing out of his marbles, and he is out. He is out indefinitely, which really stings. Because he's been playing so good recently. That's your best receiver gone for ASU. If I'm Iowa State, Cam Skattebo is Cam Skattebo. Levitt's a great quarterback, but quite frankly, he really only throws to Tyson. Like, there's rarely any other throws, and if they are, they're screen passes to, like, Matei or our tight end, or Skattebo or the other receiver options. And Xavier Guillory does have, like, occasional breakout 50-yard bomb touchdowns. And Melquan Stovall is a very fundamental receiver. I'm not putting any shade on them whatsoever. I think they're good receivers, and I wish they would get more targets. But maybe the defense gets a little bit gets easier lockups on those players, considering they're not so focused on Jordan Tyson now. It's going to be ASU and Cam Skattebo offensively. And while Iowa State doesn't have a good rush defense, they can just load the box up. They can just load the box up and shut ASU down offensively. So what I think this game is going to come down to is, well, first off, if ASU can get some points offensively, that would be huge. That would really change the outcome of this game if they can move the ball through the air and then, of course, on the floor. But really what I think this game is going to come down to is how ASU's defense is going to perform against Iowa State's offense, which I cannot lie. ASU's defense has been very, very solid in the first half of games. But in the second half of games, once that momentum boost gets there, they kind of slip up and let up really big plays. There's been like every single game so far, our defense can be so solid and shut down teams when we need to. But then on one random play, there will be a person floating absolutely wide open for a 30-yard touchdown, or like a 60-yard breakaway run will happen. And if you're not putting up 21 points to Iowa State's 0 points, your defense is going to make that mistake eventually. Your defense is going to make that mistake, and I don't think your offense is going to be up by such a huge margin to just win the game by just draining the clock and managing your time properly. If ASU goes into halftime with like the score like 14-7, I'd be very worried for us coming out of the second half. That's why I've got Iowa State winning. Iowa State also has a 6'4 receiver who has been a solid target this year, and ASU did have a pretty hard time guarding T-Mac, which is pretty much just a 6'4 receiver, the same idea. I mean, 6 receptions, 68 yards, and a touchdown, but, eventually he wasn't in the game and stuff, and also a very collapsed Arizona team. I'm sure if he had a little bit help anywhere else, he could maybe get the ball a bit more, but Iowa State is basically just a much better football team with a quarterback who is much better than Noah Fafita and a 6'4 receiver as well as other options. Now, what I question about Iowa State is the run game. The run game at the beginning of the year started off really solid, but since then has kind of dwindled, and ASU does have a really good rush defense. But I feel like if ASU doesn't get very generous turnovers or very generous mistakes from Iowa State, which I don't think Iowa State is going to give up many of. This is the big game. I don't think they're going to give up very many mistakes. I don't think ASU will either. That's why when it comes down to it, I think Iowa State is going to take us down. Now, if we had Jordan Tyson, I would, in a blink of an eye, take ASU. It's just too much. It's just too much of a football team. If ASU is Jordan Tyson, they're seriously one of the best football teams in the country. But without him, I'm not sure how ASU is. I mean, you can make the argument that at the start of the season, Jordan Tyson didn't start off too good, but we also took 2 of our losses in the start of the season. Now, again, one of them was without our starting quarterback, but still, you lost that game to Texas Tech. You can only be so reliant on Cam Scatterbo or Sam Levitt to use his legs, like, before you have to throw the ball. You've got to throw the ball at some point. And we do have very solid options, but how long can they last? I mean, they're not going to get – this is the most attention they're going to get through the air they have gotten all season, except for maybe Mateer. But Mateer has been an end zone merchant and a screen pass merchant from what I've seen, making occasional just regular pass plays. But other than that, I have really only seen occasional deep balls to Guillory or screen passes to Stovall. Like they're kind of just clutch time receivers when Jordan Tyson isn't open. So who's going to step up to the plate and run the nasty routes that Tyson does? Maybe they'll have a breakout game, but I'm taking the Cyclones in this one. Sorry, ASU. I've bet against ASU a lot this year, but without Jordan Tyson, I'm really questioning the capability of this offense. But I hope ASU can get it done. I do think, if Iowa State makes any mistakes, if ASU turns the ball over, it might be wraps. But if Iowa State turns the ball over and ASU plays very conservative and nice football, I think ASU can win. Another problem you have to note about ASU is we've had insane kicker issues. Our kicker missed an absolute cheap shot against Arizona right in front of the goal. Missed an absolute cheap shot. Hit the upright, which is just not good. Not what you want to see going into a game like this. Can you even put your kicker up to the plate to kick a field goal? I don't think so. So that's also something that plays into the game. You can't really be settling for 3. You've got to get the end zone. So that also is a huge problem. So give me Iowa State. I love you, Sun Devils, but that Jordan Tyson injury really hurt. Georgia versus Texas. Don't get it twisted. Don't get it tripped. Texas is not a good football team. Texas A&M is just worse. That's simply it. Texas A&M only had hype in this game because of their home crowd, and you've got to give so much faith, or you've got to give so much credit. Sorry, not faith. You've got to give so much credit to that 12th man because Texas Texas A&M has lost 1, 2, 3 now of their last 3 SEC conference games. Their only win in the past 4 games came against New Mexico State. Since losing Connor Wayman, this team has looked like buns. And I'll say it time and time again, Marcel Reed went into that LSU game and got a buzz. He got a buzz against an LSU team that was overranked and not as good as we thought. Texas barely put up 17 points against this A&M defense. Barely 17 points. And while Texas is tallying almost 500 yards of offense, they're still making turnovers and making mistakes. And I'm just going into a game like this where you had given after given. I mean, A&M was not doing anything. The only points A&M scored was because of a pick six. That was it. I mean, A&M didn't really do shit. I will say the Texas defense, and I've said it multiple times as well, the Texas defense is the star of the team. But offensively, Texas is buns. And Georgia coming off of an absolute thriller, you might think this team has regressed. I don't really think they have regressed, but I don't think they've gotten better either. I think this is just the Georgia team that we have been with all year. Against Alabama, that loss against Alabama, so far, every time Alabama has a high-scoring good game, it's because Jalen Milroe is able to run with his legs. In games Jalen Milroe is not able to run with his legs, he gets swashbuckled. He does not play a good game, and they end up losing. That's the big key for me. Against Oklahoma, Jalen Milroe had 15 carries for 7 yards. Now, that can be destroyed a little bit by some sacks, but as well, I mean, that's still something, you got to note. When Jalen Milroe is not moving with his feet, the offense performs so poorly. Against LSU, Jalen Milroe had 109 yards over the air, but 4 touchdowns and 185 yards with his feet. That's the difference. That's the difference in all of these games. Against Vanderbilt, he had 7 carries for 10 yards, and while I'm not going to say he had a problem getting it done over the air, he sort of did struggle over the air. He had a good game, but he also threw an interception, and against Vanderbilt, that ended up being all they needed. In a game where he is not running with his feet, they're losing. And then their biggest performance, Alabama, against Georgia. While Jalen Milroe had a very good game over the air, that you can thank Ryan Williams for a lot of that. He had 1 interception, but he also had 16 carries for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's the difference. In games Alabama is using, and Jalen Milroe is using his legs, that's when they're a good football team. But teams that can shut him down, like Tennessee, Alabama's losing. And that was the problem for Georgia for a little bit. And that's what led to their first loss, was they couldn't stop Jalen Milroe from running the ball. And that led to their demise. I guarantee you, give Georgia that game back, especially not at Alabama on like a neutral site. They're not letting that one slip by. Georgia's other loss to Ole Miss, that was Carson Beck's last terrible performance. That was like his last awful performance. Since then, he has not played like the worst football ever. He has definitely started to situate himself into a better position as a quarterback. But he also, he was a fumble and an interception in that Ole Miss game, which pretty much led to points both times. Yeah, let me see here. Pretty much it led to points both times, put the game away. Carson Beck's mistakes. But then we could go ahead and look back at the Georgia-Texas game in a game where tie all this conversation back about Georgia's defense and Carson Beck performing badly. Carson Beck performed like shit against Texas. He threw 3 interceptions, and Georgia only had 283 yards. The problem was Georgia's defense had no issue shutting down Texas's offense because they didn't have any worries. No quarterback to run, no quarterback to watch running. Quinn Ewers doesn't run. They absolutely shut down the defense or the offense and forced Texas to commit 4 turnovers. and they failed 4 of their 5 fourth down conversions as well, which I'm sure most of that came probably in poop crunch time. Georgia was up 23-0 going into halftime. They didn't struggle in this game, even in a game Carson Beck is performing so poorly in at Texas as well. Georgia is getting it done. I will be damned. I will be very surprised. I will even count it as a hideous prediction on the year if Georgia loses this game to Texas. I think Texas will do what they did last time and score points in poop time and maybe get like a scoop and score or pick 6 or something like that. But in terms of Georgia, I think they're just one of the best teams that Texas has faced all year, and they've got to face them twice. And while I say earlier you don't want to face a team twice, I stand by that. But it's different when it's like shit versus good. Like in the other scenario, it's good versus good. That's where things get scary. But in this, it's shit versus good. And I know that's crazy. A lot of people are like, you're calling Texas shit, and I will say yes. Texas has a very good defense, but offensively, they have not been very impressive this year. In their only 2 ranked matchups, they're barely scoring any points. And, I mean, they barely have played anybody as well. We don't want to talk about Alabama's strength of schedule and why they should get in and all these teams' strength of schedule. Texas hasn't played shit. Texas has not played shit. Their only good performance was against Michigan early in the year, but that was a super overranked Michigan team. That was a super overranked. I don't care what they did against Ohio State. That's a rivalry. This game was just second game of the year, insane viewership for a super overranked team. Texas went in there ready to stun the big house, but little did they know that team was just going to be terrible. I mean, Texas has not played anybody. I would not be surprised if they lose this game and then they lose in their first game of the playoff. I would not be surprised, and I don't think you guys should be surprised. This Texas team is not the same team they were last year, and it just sucks that they went up against Washington because Washington was such a good year, such a good team last year, and Texas peaked last year, in my opinion. This Texas team has not been impressive to me this year. I knew once Georgia was going into Texas, I was like, hold up, wait a minute. Georgia is bouncing back, and they're getting a win. And once I saw how Texas performed, I watched that at a family dinner, okay? Hear me out. We were all waiting for our food and stuff, and while everybody was chit-chatting, I was on my corner with the boys, and we were watching the game, and I was disgusted. I was disgusted by how poorly Texas was performing. Just disgusted. And yeah, give me Georgia. Give me Georgia to win. Not by a lot. Texas has a good defense, but give me Georgia. SMU versus Clemson. Clemson might have just blown. No, might have. Not might have. They just blew their playoff chances. And unless this team wins, which I would think is insane. If they won this game, I love getting the hiccups when I'm making videos. It's so amazing. If this team wins, I'd be super surprised. But quite frankly, Clemson, against any form of competition, you got to look at their schedule in the ACC. They've had one of the weakest schedules in the ACC as well, not the SEC, not the Big Ten. They've had one of the worst schedules or one of the easiest schedules in the ACC aside from their non-conference. Their non-conference has been brutal with Georgia and South Carolina. But Clemson got swamped in their home field by Louisville. They got swamped first game of the year against Georgia. And then they just lost to a last-second touchdown by literally one person and one person only, Lenoris Sellers. I think his name is Lenoris. I think that's how you say it. Clemson against competition. Pfft, terrible. Trash. Poop. SMU against competition. 3-point loss against a early, hot BYU team, which is a very impressive win in my opinion, or a very impressive loss in my opinion. You got to think that's SMU's only loss, and people forget it because it happened at the beginning of the year. But they also have a road win against Louisville, the team that killed Clemson, a absolute annihilation over Pitt. Pitt should have beat Clemson. And quite frankly, in these last couple games, since the barely a win over Duke in overtime, this SMU team has really not struggled, except for maybe Boston College, but still, they led the whole time. SMU is winning this game. Now, I'm giving Clemson the benefit of the doubt. They have had a defense that has shown up. I said that at the start of the year. That Georgia-Clemson game was defensive and close for a long time before Georgia just broke free. Clemson's defense held up really well. Clemson's defense also held up very well against South Carolina. But the time that Clemson's defense didn't hold up against very well was against Louisville. And I think that's my key piece here is SMU kind of handled Louisville in a very, very split matchup. But if you look at how Louisville handled Clemson, I mean, like, it wasn't very hard. It wasn't very hard. Clemson also, I mean, the 450 yards of offense, might I mention. They converted 5 of their 6 fourth downs. 5 of their 6 fourth downs. Yet Louisville is still winning this game. Louisville even had a missed field goal. Clemson did have a missed field goal, 2 missed field goals. But, like, dude, this game was over. It was 26-7 before Clemson tried to make some sort of comeback to try and win the game. I mean, that was when they finally activated offensively, right? Like, I don't know. You look at the Louisville game, and a game Louisville played very good. They're winning against Clemson so easily. And a game where Louisville played really good as well was against SMU. And, like, yeah, they had 1 interception and failed 2 fourth downs, but they also had the split amount of yards. That was the difference in the game, and I've said that before, but SMU also granted them a missed field goal, so it's kind of fair. I'm just saying, you look at the team that killed Clemson in conference play and SMU handled in their home turf. I think Cade Klubnik running the ball, maybe passing the ball, maybe getting some big plays. I think a lot of this score will come in crunch time, though. Give me SMU to win this one. I'm pretty confident in SMU this year. And that's absolutely crazy that you could see a world where ASU wins the Big 12 championship, Oregon wins the Big 10 championship, SMU wins the Big 12 the ACC championship, and Texas wins the SEC championship. None of those teams were in their conferences. None of those teams were in the conferences. And if ASU and Oregon win their conferences, people got to look at the Pac-12 on a whole new level. I mean, a whole new level. Because if the moment 2 teams leave the Pac-12 and they win their conference, ASU has not been a good team in the Pac-12 in the past couple years. Oregon, yeah, but not compared to Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State and stuff like that. You got to look at the Pac-12 very differently. I believe this is our last game. I think, yeah, this is our last game. I flipped Penn State, or I flipped this game and Clemson on accident. The Clemson SMU was supposed to be the last one. Oregon versus Penn State. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. These teams are playing at the same time. Oregon versus Penn State. Oregon versus Penn State. Oh boy, Penn State. Aren't you guys happy? Not only did you guys get blessed by Michigan taking down the Buckeyes, you also got moved up a spot. You got moved up to 3 over Notre Dame. I thought Notre Dame was going to be that must have been my ranking. Oopsies. Georgia went up 2 spots. Why did Georgia go up 2 spots? Why did Georgia go up 2 spots after winning in 8 overtimes? Dude, I cannot stand the playoff committee. I know it's just a projection and whatnot, and it doesn't necessarily matter, but God, they're so stupid. Like, they're so annoying, man. They still have a 2-loss Miami team over ASU, while Miami's losing games and ASU's winning games. ASU's winning games against ranked teams as well. Miami's losing to unranked teams, but whatever. Oregon versus Penn State. Penn State, I mean, again, I was really on this team's arse. I was on this team's ass after their loss against Ohio State. They blew it, but in another world, they didn't blow it. And they also got screwed of a call where that running back caught it and made a football move, and then he fumbled it, and they called it an incomplete catch. They got screwed there. Penn State has prevailed the competition, which is some things other opponents have not been able to do. Oregon, though, has prevailed all the competition and Ohio State. So could that be the separation there? Oregon is favored by 3.5 points, and I think this game is really cool because we weren't expecting this game. We weren't expecting this at all. And I think that's going to bring something different to Penn State. If you've also noticed, my backgrounds haven't just been the team that I'm picking in this video. I picked the ASU background for Iowa State winning. Like I've just been picking backgrounds that look good for these 5 games. Haven't been picking the team that I'm picking to win. But Oregon, their most solid team in the country, won every single game. They've had their close ones, but they've prevailed, and they've won every single game this year, which is something people should look at as much more luxurious. Oregon is in the Big Ten Championship in their first year here, and they've kind of solidified their name as number 1. They really have. They've solidified their name as number 1. They've been number 1. And do they stay number 1? I don't think so. I am going with the Penn State Nittany Lions to win this game. You might think I'm crazy, but I got to say, and I might be putting this a little too high scoring. I will say, this one might be a little too high scoring, but looking at how Ohio State played against Oregon, game ended up being pretty high scoring. So maybe Oregon's defense struggles a bit more than their offense. Penn State, Ohio State. That game was more defensive, so maybe Penn State's offense struggles more than their defense. What happens when those two teams meet? I think you can expect a more offensive matchup, while Oregon's offense is probably, I would say right now, better than Ohio State's offense. 1, because they outscored them, and 2, because Ohio State's offense put up 10 points against Michigan. I think Penn State's defense is better than Oregon's defense. And it's going to come down to, can Penn State just really make big stops, 1 or 2? Can they get turnovers? Now, I think that's what's going to happen. I think Oregon's going to make some slip-ups, and I think they're going to drop some turnovers. Whereas I think Penn State's going to be playing relatively good football. I don't think they're going to make many turnovers. I think they're going to make Drew Aller move this offense, and they obviously had a lot to learn from their Ohio State game. You live and you learn. You lose a game like that again, but now you're gifted an opportunity. I don't think this team is going to blink twice. Oregon wasn't expecting to play Penn State. They were getting ready for Ohio State. Now they're playing Penn State, and I think the world is going to gloss over Penn State. I think the world is going to gloss over Penn State. In a true comeback story, I think Penn State will win this game. Maybe a bit too high scoring, but I'll go with it. I wrote the score for a reason. The universe was telling me something. I have Penn State winning against Oregon, handing them their first loss and getting the number 1 overall seed in the college football playoff. Wouldn't that be crazy? Wouldn't that be a crazy turnaround while Penn State wasn't even supposed to get in the Big Ten championship? They were gifted an opportunity by 7-5 Michigan, and they end up claiming the 1 seed. Wouldn't that be a story? I think it might happen. I think it will happen. But that's our last game that's our last championship game of the year, and that's our last game of the week. And yeah, I'm really excited for this week, but let me know what you guys think. Let me know how you guys feel. A like and subscribe would help. A comment always helps. That's all from me. Adios.